Hello, my name is Tammy Gordon. I am Professor of History and Director of Public History at North Carolina State University. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this symposium, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. The title of my paper is The Conscience of the Nation, Shaping the Future with Historical Thinking. Activist, public intellectual, and historian of African American history John Hope Franklin famously wrote that the historian is the conscience of the nation. This is an idea to which I have returned often in recent times as political aggression and public dialogue has intensified and as the pandemic moved our work almost entirely online. It's an idea that needs to guide our field's thinking about its future. As historians, we don't talk about the future all that much. We spend a great deal of time putting together those bits and pieces of the past that people have left for us, those letters, diaries, books, organizational documents, manifestos, and other pieces produced through the process of living. We spend a lot of time trying to understand the systems to which these pieces belonged. As people who study the past, we make terrible fortune tellers, but at a time like this, which I think is a time for reflection and planning, it may be wise to consider how historical thinking shapes the future, to ponder what we as historians might owe the people who come 7 generations after us, not before us. Public history, I also teach historical methods, and I usually know when beginning students are starting to think historically when we discuss the use of primary sources. And this usually happens when we're looking at something wildly personal, like a medical report on a patient or a page of a diary. And one of the students will ask about the future, not the past. Does being a historian make you a little paranoid? Does it make you nervous to know the people of the future will be looking at your things? They ask. My first and most visceral response is, I don't care because I'll be dead, but I do have to admit that every once in a while as I'm texting my children, I find myself wanting to add a text that says, "Dear future historians, I really am a better parent than this exchange of texts would suggest." But being a historian does make me think about the future, not just because I may be assessed by people I don't know. I do want my experience on this earth to help the people of the future find solutions to their problems. So if reading my sometimes impatient texts to my kids helps the people of the future, then I want to make sure they have access to my sometimes impatient texts. If the thought of future assessment by people 7 generations from now whose values I cannot know makes me write more genial texts to my kids, then historical thinking has made me think twice about my actions, perhaps making for better communications and decisions in my present. Such a dynamic, as Franklin noted, works as well on a broader, more national or global level. Robust historical thinking and research leads to reflection and accountability. Solving problems with historical knowledge has 2 basic forms. The first is focus on the present, for no matter whether a problem is social, environmental, mechanical, or political, no problem can be solved without an assessment of how that problem was created in the first place. So in a very fundamental way, all problem solving starts with historical knowledge. The second function of historical knowledge in problem solving focuses on the future and in seeing today as the past of the future. We don't know what problems we will create for future generations, although I'm sure we can surmise a few right now, or what ones they may create for themselves. And so as historians, we should be mindful of caring for historical resources that may be of use to the people of the future in ways that protect those of the present, especially people who are politically, economically, or socially vulnerable. In a now classic meditation on historical language and sources, historian Estelle B. Friedman tells the story of a formative event in the life of an American woman. And I quote from it at length here because Friedman tells the story so well. He writes, "On a clear June morning in 1948, the controversial prison reformer Miriam Van Waters made a painful and momentous decision. For months she had been embroiled in a political struggle with conservative state officials who wished to dismiss her as the liberal superintendent of the Massachusetts Reformatory for Women. Local newspapers headlined the claims that Van Waters coddled prisoners, hired ex-inmates, and condoned homosexual behavior in prison. Investigators from the Department of Corrections interrogated her staff and seized inmate files as evidence. As she sat before a glowing fireplace in her home on that June morning, Miriam Van Waters fueled the blaze with some of her most precious possessions. The burning of the letters continues, she wrote in her journal that day. One can have no personal life in this battle, so I have destroyed many letters of over 22 years. Van Waters had met her patron and romantic partner, Geraldine Thompson, 22 years earlier. Since the late 1920s, they had corresponded almost daily, sharing their thoughts, their activities, and their love. As she burned the letters, Van Waters recorded her sense of loss. They might have been inspiration, history, joy, style to me in old age. Instead, she resolved to keep the message within herself. The letters are bone and sinew now in my carnage. Doubtless my character has been formed by them. Friedman uses this incident to explore the formation of sexual identity in a transitional time, when love between women became less governed by the idea of intimate female friendship and more by the new psychological theories that pathologize that friendship. Friedman's thoughts on these issues have profoundly informed subsequent work on identity and the history of gender and sexuality in the United States. But as a public historian, someone who specializes in the application of historical knowledge, I see something additional in this incident. Van Waters burned her letters to face a problem in her present. Her political enemies sought to use rumors of her sexuality to force her from a position of power. She mourned the loss of a future use for those letters for her personally, but she had her memories of them. 73 years later, we have neither the letters nor the memories. They could have contained insight that would be useful for helping us solve our problems. How did these two women work out their relationship in a world that refused to recognize or value it? Together, how did they navigate the dangers their relationship posed to their comfort, their safety, their security? In 1948, Van Waters could not have imagined that in 2021 throughout the United States, there would be many people looking for insights on how to deal with targeted state persecution of sexual minorities. Had she been thinking like a historian, she may have made a choice other than the burning of the letters. In an essay on historical knowledge and the recent Brexit decision, public historian Alex Green calls for historians to be bolder in protecting sources for future historians. She writes, "Documenting the now seems to me a vital task for historians of all kinds. Otherwise, we will lose the resources to contextualize and understand future nows, and deprive others of the chance to protest, challenge, and hold people to account." We as historians are in a position not only to solve today's problems with historical thinking, but to bring historical thinking to the care of the resources that may advise future solutions. We can advocate for archives. We can help people to manage their materials with precise metadata. We can ask people to protect the resources they might otherwise neglect or lose or destroy. We can draw on the histories of our own institutions to interrogate the ways our field has failed to be ethical and inclusive, and design new policies and practices that address the legacies of those inequities. We can teach people about the power of historical inquiry. We can be the conscience of our societies.